Hello and welcome to It's the Audacity for Me. I'm your host, Rhea Davis, and I would love if you'd join me weekly where we'll be discussing all things related to living a more balanced and natural life. If you're looking to break free from what you've always done and live a life more in tune with the balance of nature, then you're in the right place. Let's get started with this week's episode. Hello and welcome back to It's the Audacity for Me. I am your host, Rhea Davis, and this week we are talking about the concepts of good and bad and why everything that you might have been taught about those concepts or ideas is totally false. So I'm really excited to dive in, but before we do, I wanted to give a couple of updates because I've been sort of MIA on most social media, and that's because I recently, if you missed it, I put out a free training. It's a 5-part video series, but I uploaded the audio to the podcast as well. So you can catch it either place here or on YouTube. And you can also grab the free PDF with journal prompts that go along with the training to help you create the blueprint for your dream life by stepping into the most authentic version of you. So if you haven't caught that already, make sure you go to the show notes and grab the link for that. And make sure that you subscribe if you haven't already, because I have some other really exciting ideas and some things that I'm working on coming out soon. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the free trainings or anything like that. All right, so on today's episode, why everything you've been taught about good and bad is a lie and how it's really all just perspective. All good and bad is just a personal judgment based on that person's values or beliefs. It's really mentally freeing when you take the judgment out of the equation and realize that's just one part of it. That's just one piece or one perspective or one person's viewpoint. And I want to talk about how you can balance out good and bad in your life so you can see things from that more holistic, bird's eye point of view instead of getting caught up in little details that don't really matter. And you can also live your life without this burden of judgment. You can feel much lighter and much more free when you remove the labels of good and bad. So I am really excited to jump in. I hope you are too. Let's get going. So here's the thing. Most people assign meaning to just about everything in life. And if you have a brain, then likely you're doing this. I don't say that sarcastically. Truly, that's how our brains work. So most everyone is doing this. They're assigning meaning and picking out patterns most of the time without even realizing it. Think about different songs that have meaning to you. Or when you smell a certain smell, maybe you smell coffee and, you think of the Folgers commercial. I don't know. But you're assigning meaning. You hear, a little tune and it reminds you of a song. You are picking up patterns in the way people are acting. And sometimes we pick up patterns that aren't really there. That's part of our brain's job, though. Our brains pick up patterns and identify things that seem to go together, maybe a cycle, things like that, because that's how nature works. Everything in nature is a pattern. It's a cycle. It's predictable. And our brains like predictability. Neuroscience and psychology both tell us that our brains assign meaning to everything in life. And studies have been done on this where there were no patterns whatsoever. And the people participating in the studies were still trying to pick out patterns. So it's something that we do naturally. We can't help it, but it's something that can kind of hurt us a little bit. So it's the reason why we have limiting beliefs. And it's really the reason behind pretty much everything that we do. If you don't know what a limiting belief is, make sure that you subscribe because I am going to do an episode about that, a whole episode on limiting beliefs in just a few weeks. But a short synopsis of a limiting belief. A belief is something that we think to be true, right? We believe something. That's a truth that we have. So if you think about the word limiting, that's something that's holding you back. Well, a limiting belief is something that we are believing to be true, but it's not actually true. And in believing that it is true, we're holding ourselves back. A good example of this would be the belief, this is a limiting belief, that money only comes, you can only get rich if you just hustle and work hard and long days and sacrifice and all of that. And while that could be the case, that could definitely be the case for people, that's been the case for people, that's not the case for all people. That's not true. That's not an absolute truth, because there's billionaires out there who have done absolutely nothing to earn that money. They've maybe done stocks or, like a passive income. I don't want to say have done absolutely nothing, but I'm just saying there's ways to get to that level of wealth without blood, sweat, and tears and long hours, because people have done it. And there's examples of that. So that's how we know it's not an absolute truth. We can find examples that prove that it's not the truth. And by believing that that's the truth, you're holding yourself back and ignoring possibilities to, in this example, reach wealth, because you're so focused on what you think has to happen to get there. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit because, like I said, I have the limiting beliefs episode coming out soon. So stay tuned for that if you want to know more about limiting beliefs, more examples, ways to conquer them, all of that. But I want to switch gears right now to tell you a little story. One of those lovely life lesson, make you think stories. You may have heard it before, but I want to read it to you. And as I do, I want you to think about good and bad in the situations in the story, and just think about the perspectives. There once was a farmer in ancient China who owned a horse. "You are so lucky to have a horse to pull the cart for you," his neighbors told him. "Maybe," the farmer replied. One day he didn't latch the gate properly, and the horse ran away. "Oh no, this is terrible news! Such misfortune!" his neighbors cried. "Maybe," the farmer replied. A few days later, the horse returned, bringing with it 6 wild horses. "How fantastic! You are so lucky! Now you will be rich," his neighbors told him. "Maybe," the farmer replied. The following week, the farmer's son was breaking in one of the wild horses when it kicked out and broke his leg. "Oh no, such bad luck all over again," the neighbors cried. "Maybe," the farmer replied. The next day, soldiers came and took away all the young men in the village to fight in war. The farmer's son was left behind due to his injury. "You are so lucky," his neighbors cried. "Maybe," the farmer replied. You can see that in this story, it's either all good and all bad, or there is no good or bad. So it's really however you want to look at it. If we look at it like everything is good and bad, we can recognize that life has to be a balance between the two. There's things to celebrate and there are things to learn from, but neither are good or bad. Or they're both, however you want to look at it. That's something called polarity. You can't have one without the other. So everything either has to be neutral because every situation has good and bad, or nothing at all. And you might not always see the good and bad, and I'm doing air quotes that you can't see, but you might not always see the outcomes or the side effects of something. And you can see this in medicine, you can see this in politics, you can see this examples of this all over the place where something is implemented, maybe a medicine or a policy in politics, whatever it is. And, it's great. It has all this great stuff. But then we realize there's an impact to a certain group of people that we didn't foresee coming. Or maybe that drug that was released had side effects that weren't predicted or that we didn't know about. So when you label things as good or bad, you're really not seeing it for the whole picture. But by seeing things as they truly are and being open to the lessons that life has to give you, you are able to learn those lessons before they become overwhelming burdens. If the same problem or issue or circumstance, situation, whatever, if it keeps coming up for you, it's probably a lesson that you need to learn. And when you have a life lesson to learn, it's going to keep coming up until you recognize it and you learn from it. And they'll probably get harder and harder until you do. But these lessons don't have to be so hard if you learn to recognize them and you learn to recognize them as lessons. And that comes when you stop labeling things as good or bad. When you're not willing to see things as they are and you aren't able to see the lesson that each circumstance has for you, you end up with a substantially harder time because the lesson gets more and more dramatic trying to catch your attention. Life is always happening for you. And when you remove these labels, you're able to see that so much more clearly. It's really all about perspective. Not so fun things are always going to happen to us. It's more about how we see them and how we respond. Think back just a few minutes ago, I was talking about nature and how there's patterns and cycles to nature. And whenever winter comes, do you think that the trees and the animals and the bird, whatever, all of nature, do you think it worries that winter's going to last forever, or that it's never going to end, or it's hopeless because it doesn't know when the end is near? No, it knows that things ebb and flow and come in cycles, and there's good and there's bad and there's everything in between, and it's all of that at once. It's all about how we see and respond to those things that happen. And when we remove the judgment, it's important to remember that applies everywhere. And so when we look at, if you think back to the nature example with winter and spring, people have preferences and just dislike certain seasons, but in general, people recognize for the most part that winter's not bad. It's just part of the season, it's part of the cycle of life. And when you take away the label of bad, you can just see it for what it is. And it's an important part of the cycle, right? When things die and decay, they feed the soil and create great hospitable environments for the next round of plants, the next generation. It all works together and it feeds off of each other in this just beautiful symphony of nature. I'm going to get off my soapbox about how cool I think nature is, but I just want you to realize that the good and the bad, they're all one and the same. They ebb and flow. So keep in mind that if you're having a bad time, it's only here for a season. But also remember that in the good times, because that'll only be here for a season too. So remove the judgment. And when you do this, remove the judgment from your past self too. Remove the judgment from your past self too. Because a lot of us say things and talk to ourselves in our heads about how just, when you go to see a movie or something and they say, oh, enjoy the movie, and you say you too, and you dwell on it for the rest of the afternoon and think, oh my gosh, how stupid am I? Why would I say that? Oh, who would do that? Whatever you tell yourself in your head. When you do that, you are judging yourself and you're saying things to yourself that you wouldn't even say to somebody you don't like. So why are you saying it to yourself? And if it was a friend that happened to, or, said something silly or whatever, you would never think those things about them. So why are you doing it to you? Remove the good and bad labels from everything that has happened to you in your past, and you will feel lighter. If you just think back to, something that you've labeled as bad in your past, something that you've done or something, whatever, something that's happened, and you take that bad label off of it, you can see how that's turned into an experience that brought you where you are now and how it actually served you. And we can see that from the present. We can look back and we can see, hindsight's 2020. We can see the bird's eye perspective now that we couldn't see back then. But you can get better and better and better at seeing it in the moment and in the present and really having this full picture view when you drop the judgment. You can't have judgment and labels on things if you want to see all perspectives. It's like a closed mind, open mind, or growth mindset, fixed mindset kind of thing. You have to be open. So in my own life, I can definitely look back and see where things have worked out for me that at the time seemed really crappy. So a good example, I moved to Georgia rather impulsively because where I was living, where I grew up, was just, I hated it at the moment. Life sucked. Nothing was working out for me. It wasn't fun for me. And in hindsight, that was the best thing that's ever happened to me. I was able to, it really catapulted me to where I am today. But in the moment, it just seemed crappy and I didn't know what the future held and I didn't know what was going to happen, but I was able to create my own future. And had I not gone through all of those bad situations or situations that I've labeled as bad, I wouldn't have ended up where I am now. And my life was working for me back then, even when I didn't realize it. Life was still happening for me, not to me. And we can't always know what that is, what's best for us, or, we can't always see what needs to happen to take us where we need to go. But the biggest thing you do have to remember is that life is happening for you and not to you. I want you to really, really think about this question. Pause it if you have to, journal it out if you have to, whatever, but really think about what would happen if you lived life as if your success was inevitable. Would you still question if something was good or bad? I stopped talking just for a second because you have to reflect on this. Would you question if a circumstance or a situation was good or bad if you knew that your success was inevitable? Absolutely not. It would be all good because you would know, you would have this innate trust and understanding that whatever was happening for you, for your success, and to take you where you need to go. When you see things for what they are without judgment, you operate from a place where you are free from the fear and limiting beliefs that are holding you back from reaching your success. So it's kind of heavy. I'm going to bring it back down to earth. I really want to talk about what you can do today. What you can do, what is actionable. So we talked about all these like lofty things, removing judgment, forgiving our past, right? But what does that look like? How can we actually do that? So the biggest thing is forgiving yourself, forgiving your past self, and just taking away that judgment and treating yourself like you love you, because you should love you. You're great. You're awesome. Love you. I love you. Okay, that's it. But one thing that this is totally random, but this girl I used to work with at Applebee's, her name is Micah. So if she's listening to this or ever listens to this, hey, thank you so much for sharing this random thing on Facebook like 6 years ago that I've never forgotten. But she shared something and it's called Ho'oponopono. And it's a Hawaiian practice that is all about forgiveness and reconciliation, and I really, really, really like it. So it's just a 4-step process that you go through, and you can do it with others, you can do it with situations, but just walking through it with yourself. And with forgiving yourself, this is something that you can do. So pick out whatever situation that you're removing the judgment from in your past, or whatever it is, whatever you need to forgive. And just really hold on to that and think about it and visualize, what it is. And say, I'm sorry. If it's, your past self that you need to forgive, I'm sorry, past self, for XYZ. And then part 2 is forgiveness. You and anyone else in the situation, I forgive you. And number 3 is thank you. That might be hard if you're trying to forgive someone that hurt you, but thanking them is the best way to let it go and accept and recognize and validate that it was happening for you. And then number 4, I love you. You're sending love, and I truly believe that love will always win. Love will always conquer. And when you send love to a situation that, you're trying to forgive, I feel like it really coats all those other icky feelings and takes those away. So that's a really great practice to look into, to do. It's just that 4-step process. I'm sorry, forgiveness, thank you, I love you. Another thing that you can do today to remove these fake labels that you might have of good or bad is to notice where judgment shows up in your life. Where are you judging yourself? Where are you judging others? And try and really become aware of where you're placing judgment and reflect on how it feels. I have a couple of journal prompts as well, in addition to the ones that we talked about earlier, but reflect on the situations in your life that you've labeled. So first, look at the ones that you've labeled as negative. And I want you to identify how those later served you, how they proved to serve you. And then I want you to look at those things that were positive and see how maybe they weren't positive for everyone, or maybe they weren't all positive for you, or maybe you had unforeseen circumstances that happened because of that, whatever. And I want you to then take that same feeling and apply it to your current situation and see where you need to forgive yourself and remove those labels of good or bad. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. Definitely take the time to reflect on those questions because they are game changers. Once you get clear on those and you really work it out with yourself, you'll feel so much lighter. You'll feel so much better. So I definitely encourage you to do that. I also encourage you to check out the links in the show notes because I have the link for the free training, the Who Are You with the journal prompts. So make sure you grab that and check out my TikTok where I've been the most active, but all the socials are linked below. As always, please, 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 if this has made any sort of impact on you or you had any aha moments or just something that you'd like to share, leave a rating and review. I would love to hear from you. It really, really does make my day to hear feedback on the podcast and all of that. So please, I would really appreciate it and love you forever, even though my love for you is unconditional and not dependent on whether or not you rate or review the podcast. However, I would really super duper appreciate it. Have a wonderful day, guys. Bye. If you're interested in starting a podcast, let me tell you about Anchor. It's the easiest way to make one. It's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer, and they even distribute your podcast for you. So it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and so many more. And you can even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. All you have to do is download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm, that's ANCHOR.FM, to get started. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. If you want to connect with me, you can find me on Instagram at hippiewood.co, or you can check out our website, www.hippiewood.com, HIPPIEWOOD. On our site, you'll find free resources, links to our show, of course, the show notes, blog posts, and our shop where we sell eco-friendly products with sustainable business practices in mind. So we would love to hear from you. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a rating and review so more people can find the show and so I can hear from you because I want to hear what you think and any suggestions that you might have. Thanks again. I can't wait to see you soon.